Right, my name's Dan Wingard here with Redmond John L. Scott. I'm going to go into just the second page of the Form 21, and I'm going to be doing some reading and then pointing out some things that I think are important. So hang on to your seats. This is going to be exciting. All right, this first portion, purchase price, it may seem, well, purchase price is what it is, but there's a couple of things in here that I want you to pay attention to. It says buyer shall pay to seller the purchase price, including the earnest money, in cash at closing unless otherwise specified in this agreement. That's cash. Buyer represents that buyer has sufficient funds to close this sale in accordance with this agreement and is not relying on any contingent source of funds, including funds from loans, the sale of other property, gifts, retirement, or future earnings, except to the extent otherwise specified. So I want to point out this otherwise specified. So typically, your buyers are going to be getting a loan. So that will be shown in Form 22A, which we'll go into later. Or if they're not including a Form 22A, they're not going to have a financing contingency, please make sure that you include the 22EF, which is the evidence of funds, and there will be places there to state where these funds are coming from. Otherwise, you're potentially misrepresenting, and you could be liable if you're saying that your buyer has the cash at closing. They're not relying on any contingent source of funds. And also, if your folks are utilizing funds for the down payment or earnest money that are not readily available, that are going to be a gift, that are currently in the stock market, that needs to be stated as well. All right, and there's just a brief warning there about caution when wiring funds to avoid potential wire fraud. I encourage you to have a separate warning to make that very clear. All right, now we got a huge paragraph here on earnest money, and I'll get started here. Again, hang on to your seats. This is going to be great. Buyer shall deliver the earnest money by the delivery date listed in specific term number 7. 2 days after mutual acceptance, if that is not filled in. I always encourage you to fill that portion in so there's clarity. To the party holding the earnest money, buyer, brokerage firm, or closing agent. So as a John L. Scott broker, we do not have we do not accept earnest money funds. So that's always going to be to the closing agent, and the closing agent is the escrow company. So it's not a person, it is the escrow company. If sent by mail, the earnest money must arrive at buyer, brokerage firm, or closing agent by the delivery date. If the earnest money is held by buyer, brokerage firm, so blah, 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 we're not going to worry about that because we don't have to worry about the interest or documenting any of those things in that long rest of the paragraph. Except for the bottom portion here. Let's see. Buyer, brokerage firm may transfer the earnest money to closing agent at closing. Okay, here we are. If all or part of the earnest money is to be refunded to buyer and any such costs remain unpaid, the buyer, brokerage firm, or closing agent may deduct and pay them from there. And they're talking about the interest if there was from that. So we don't have to worry about that. Here we go. The parties instruct closing agent to provide written verification of receipt of the earnest money and notice of dishonor of any check to the parties and brokers at the address and fax numbers provided herein. So this is critical because if the firm gets audited, this is the first place that the auditors go to. They check every deal that they look at to see, was the earnest money deposited at the time that it stated it would be deposited. Upon termination of this agreement, a party or the closing agent may deliver a form authorizing the release of earnest money to the other party of the parties. It says may. There's some other criteria. The party shall execute such form and deliver the same to the closing agent. If either party fails to execute the release form, a party may make a written demand to the closing agent for the earnest money. And then there's some RCWs there. Closing agent shall deliver notice of the demand to the other party within 15 days. If the other party does not object to the demand within 20 days of closing agent's notice, closing agent shall disperse the earnest money to the party making the demand within 10 days of the expiration of the 20-day period. So I would encourage you to go through this and really get a grasp and understanding of this. It doesn't matter until somebody defaults. So it's important to know what the steps are if that takes place. If closing agent, again, that's escrow company, timely receives an objection or an inconsistent demand from the other party, closing agent shall commence an interpleader action within 60 days of such objection or inconsistent demand, unless the parties provide subsequent consistent instructions to closing agent to disperse the earnest money or refrain from commencing an interpleader action for a specified period of time. Pursuant to the law, the parties consent to service of the summons and complaint for an interpleader action by first-class mail, postage, prepaid, blah, blah, blah. If the closing agent complies with the preceding process, each party shall be deemed to have released closing agent from any and all claims or liabilities related to the disbursement of the earnest money. If either party fails to authorize release of earnest money, when required to do so under this agreement, that party shall be in breach of this agreement. For the purpose of this section, the term closing agent includes buyer, broker. So the parties authorize the party commencing an interpleader action to deduct up to $500 for the cost thereof. So there is a charge for if it does go to interpleading. Pay attention to that. Again, this will not matter until it matters, as with most things legal, other than a handshake. Included items, this is important to look at. So you had that first page that had things that you would check off, but by contract, you want to make sure that you pay attention to this because by contractually, this is what the seller is obligated to provide if they're there. It says any of the following items, including items identified in that first page, specific term 5, if the box is checked, located in or on the property are included in the sale. Built-in appliances, wall-to-wall carpeting, curtains, drapes, and other window treatments. So this ends up being an issue if your stager, you're representing the seller and your stager provides some window treatments, all of a sudden they're gone. And the buyer is saying this was actually in the contract. Window and door screens, awnings, storm doors and windows, installed television antennas, ventilating, air conditioning, heating fixtures, trash compactor, garbage disposal, blah, 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 all of these, garage door openers, lighting fixtures. This can be another issue because sometimes people want to take their custom lighting fixtures. Also, if someone pulls up some shrubs, plants, and trees, that was included in the contract. So have this conversation with all parties that you're just to confirm. Sometimes if you're representing the buyer, just making sure that they're aware of this and the seller is not taking any of these things, remote controls included. All right, again, I would encourage you to read back through that and actually go through this with buyer. If you're representing the seller, go through it with the seller so the seller doesn't take anything, or you just make sure this is crossed out so you don't end up being responsible and potentially buying some curtains or any of those things if you wanted to make that right. All right, finally, D here, condition of title, unless otherwise specified, title of the property shall be marketable at closing. The following shall not cause the title to be unmarketable: rights, reservations, covenants, conditions, and restrictions presently of record in general to the area, easements, encroachments not materially affecting the value or unduly interfering with buyer's reasonable use of the property. And reserved oil and mining rights, seller shall not convey or reserve any oil, blah, blah, blah. All right, so this basically says that title is going to be conveyed by statutory warranty deed. So if this is an estate, that's not possible. So you want to make sure that you will change this to a bargain and sale deed. I can't recall the other name of that deed, but just look into that. If this agreement is for conveyance of buyer's interest in a real estate contract, the statutory warranty deed shall include a buyer's assignment of the contract sufficient to convey after acquired title. All right, so that's the first page. Make sure that you understand that and you're able to communicate effectively to either buyer or seller. And I encourage you, if you're representing the seller, to actually go through the purchase and sale agreement prior to listing, and so they understand what they're going to be looking at. Stay tuned for the next page.